Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, March the 31st, 2025. So we've just had this earthquake in Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, and this is something I want to look at. Apparently it was 7.3 on a Richter scale, and a lot of damage has been caused, and there have been fatalities. I think it was around the city of Mandalay. So yeah, we have an exact time for the earthquake, we have an exact location, and that is certainly one thing I'm going to be looking at in this video. I'm also going to do a preview of the week's events, the main astrological events as I see it. And then the last thing I do in this video is that I'm going to do an I Ching reading for the week. So this I Ching reading is going to have 4 sections: general section, then money, then career, and then relationships. So but first of all, I'm going to do my preview. So let's start by looking at the positions of the planets as the week starts. Usual reminder, if you do happen to enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be very happy to have you as a subscriber. So, beginning of the week, we've just had the new moon. So the sun is in Aries, moon is in Taurus, just separating from that new moon. We've got sort of a first quarter moon by the end of the week. And as far as precise astrological aspects are concerned, there isn't a huge amount going on, certainly at the beginning of the week. Then at the end of the week, well, on Friday, we have Saturn making a sextile to Uranus and Mars also making a sextile to Uranus. So when you hear the word sextile, you might be thinking, well, you know, that's great. Sextile is a pleasant aspect. Saturn sextile Uranus. Maybe we can harness our dynamic tension and find a way of structuring our desire for change. Or Mars sextile Uranus, you might think of that as sort of machinery, doing something useful with machinery, or doing something that gets attention. And yeah, the sextile is seductive. But you know, let's have a look at those 2 sextiles in a little more detail. So you know, there is Uranus, there is Mars, and so there's that Mars in Uranus in Taurus making a sextile to Mars in Cancer, and you know, there is Saturn in Pisces. So you've got those planets, Mars, Uranus, Saturn, coming together. And in fact, by the weekend, on Saturday the 5th, we have got Mars trine Saturn. So sounds good, but I'm not convinced. The point is that Uranus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So when you hear Mars-Saturn midpoint, you think bad things happening. Destruction, death, delays, getting annoyed. And then Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can be about getting really annoyed, getting really frustrated. You know, one way of looking at Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint would be, you know, death by explosion, because the Mars-Saturn midpoint is often about death. So turning to Alfred Witter's rules for planetary pictures and seeing what he says about Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, he does tend to associate Mars-Saturn with death. I mean, that may have something to do with the fact that Alfred Witter, when he was composing his interpretations, was influenced by the First World War. He'd served in the First World War, and he was creating his system as he was witnessing the devastation of the First World War in Germany. So there might be a certain amount of bias there. But looking at Uranus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, he writes, sudden actions which separate, violence, separation, and death, sudden death. So that might give you an idea about how this configuration might work out in a worst possible setting. But I do think it is about frustration. I mean, in a positive sense, it might be, what do we do to break free from something? And if something is really getting to us, maybe we can, maybe because it is Mars trine Saturn and Uranus sextiling Mars, Uranus sextiling Saturn, there may be something positive about it. But from a broad collective perspective, I would see the end of a week as being rather tense, particularly those days, Friday and Saturday. Then right at the end of a week, we do have a couple of potentially good aspects. We've got Sun sextile Jupiter and Venus trine Mars. Venus trine Mars is often about relationships, getting on with people. Venus trine Mars is often about sexuality, desire, attraction. And Venus and Mars can be difficult, but when they're in trine, this might be a good time for attracting people, focusing on how we can be more charismatic. And Sun sextile Jupiter is a good aspect. It's very positive. Sun in Aries, sextile Jupiter in Gemini. We may see things in a new way, and there has been a lot of negativity flying around, and maybe that Sun sextile Jupiter will allow us to break free from it. And then there is the earthquake in Myanmar. So here is the chart for the Myanmar earthquake. Notice I've said Mandalay. I have actually changed the coordinates because the Mandalay was not the epicenter. So that is the precise time of the chart. And the thing that possibly comes to mind is the fact that Mars is rising. And so Mars is at 22 Cancer, and the ascendant is at 24, as at 2414 Cancer. So that is often a signature of difficult things happening. Mars is quite a violent aspect, though the standard signature of an earthquake is, Uranus on the IC. I mean, that's not to say you can always get Uranus on the IC with an earthquake, but that's the first thing you suspect when you hear about an earthquake. The Uranus is not on the IC. The midheaven is actually 1830 Aries, so you kind of got Chiron. You could say you've got Chiron on the midheaven and Mars on the ascendant. So over the last couple of days, when I've been looking at what's going on astrologically, I have mentioned this Mars-Chiron square quite a lot, and maybe Mars on the Chiron on the midheaven, Mars on the ascendant has some link with that. Additionally, we have a Venus-Neptune conjunction, right at the end of Pisces, and that Venus-Neptune conjunction is pretty close to Skeet. Skeet being that fixed star connected with disaster, particularly disaster by water. This is not a tsunami. This is just an earthquake. I mean, just an earthquake, but it's still not water-based. But nonetheless, Venus-Neptune conjunct Skeet does potentially indicate some kind of disaster. So those are a few things to think about. One could look at the midpoints and ask, are there any exact midpoints involving the midheaven at the exact time of this disaster? Well, we can set up a 90-degree dial, and when we're doing the 90-degree dial, we're asking, what is special to the location? So we would put the midheaven on the dial. So does the midheaven really trigger anything that really gets to us? Well, the midheaven is on the Mars Hades midpoint. There's Mars and Hades. So you could say that. Mars, Hades. Mars is about violence. Hades is about things that are unpleasant. So that is a possibility, but I don't find that especially convincing. And when you're looking at earthquakes, what you're often trying to do is ask yourself, could you have predicted that beforehand? Was there anything going on which would have made you think there would have been an earthquake, some kind of disaster? Well, I've just said that there was a Venus-Neptune conjunction at the end of Pisces conjunct Skeet. The problem with that is where in the world would that have happened? I mean, it's all very well saying, oh, Venus was conjunct Neptune conjunct Skeet, but could have been anywhere. Why Myanmar? So it might be better to use a different technique. One could look at the prenatal full moon or even the postnatal new moon. Now, the new moon actually, well, at the time of recording, I'm not sure if it's actually happened yet. Has it? I'm not sure. But the thing about the new moon is it would be happening after the event, but there is a view in astrology that you can look backwards. So here's the new moon taking place on March the 29th at well, it takes place at 10:58 London time. So I'm recording this on Saturday. So the new moon has already happened. So if we set this new moon for Myanmar, there are a few indications that this might have been difficult. The South Node is exactly on the ascendant, for one thing. Also, Venus and Neptune are pretty close to the descendant. And so maybe when I was looking at this new moon, because I have looked at the new moon in the video for the weekend, I should maybe have noticed that there were lines going through Indochina. So what do I mean by lines going through Indochina? So if we create an astro map of Asia, and we concentrate on, oops, we don't need that, and we concentrate on Indochina. So here is here's Burma, and you can see these yellow lines. These are all the yellow lines where each yellow line is where Neptune is on the descendant, where Venus is on the descendant, where Mercury is opposition to descendant. This map doesn't show the nodes, but the nodes would have been there. And so this was an omission. I think the problem I have, or the problem I fall into when I do astrocartography, is I focus more on places that I find politically interesting, and it often ends up as being Europe. And I should have cast my eye towards Asia and seen. That's the first mistake I made, as I should have looked harder at Asia. And secondly, I should have considered the possibility that things can happen before the event. So we had the new moon on Saturday, but of course the earthquake was the day before. And yeah, I think this sort of blast of yellow, these yellow lines going through Burma were a signature. And so if we piece the whole thing together, and we should have been asking ourselves, where was the disaster going to take place? And maybe we would have got our clues. And what about Burma's chart? Now, there's something really interesting about Burma's chart. And Burma, I know it's Myanmar. I'm very used to calling it Burma. Now, Burma got its independence in 1948. And here is the chart for Burma. Well, Myanmar. It was called Burma when it got its independence from the British. And you'd think it was freedom at midnight, but it wasn't. It was freedom at 4:20 a.m. So why did it get freedom at 4:20 a.m.? Astrologers. Burmese astrologers chose 4:20 a.m. as the time of independence because they thought it was auspicious. Now, I don't know a great deal about Myanmar, but in a general sense, we can say that Myanmar as a country since independence has been a complete disaster. I mean, it really has. It just hasn't worked out. Some countries in Indochina have prospered. Or have they? Indochina. Well, let's think Indochina. Well, it's not really Indochina, is it? It's Is it? Well, I mean, I suppose you think more about sort of Vietnam, and I mean, Vietnam is what you really think about Indochina. So Indochina has had its ups and downs. I mean, Vietnam has, of course, been brutalized by its war with by America's by America and American intervention in the region. So that's true. But if you think about Thailand and Malaya, I think Thailand, Malaysia, these countries have done relatively well. Of course, Thailand was never under colonial rule. Thailand always maintained its independence. But Myanmar has had military government, it's had civil war, it's had poverty, it's had persecution, it's had arrests of political leaders. It has been a disaster since independence. And so, I don't know about Burmese astrology. I think it's a sidereal system related to Vedic astrology. But I really would question whether that was a good time to have independence. I'm thinking that one reason 4:20 a.m. was chosen because of the proximity of Jupiter to the ascendant. But there's obviously other stuff that I can't see because I don't know the system. It's possible that whoever chose this chart liked the fact that Sun was exactly conjunct Mercury. So in Western astrology, that would be a Kazemi conjunction. Maybe there's a Burmese equivalent of a Kazemi conjunction. Though, given how bad things have turned out in Burma or Myanmar, this is not a very good advertisement for Kazemi Mercury. And then look at Neptune. Neptune is exactly square. Neptune square Sun, Neptune square Mercury. You've got the Moon in the Via Combustor, Uranus in Gemini in the seventh house. That is not good. Jupiter's in Sagittarius in the first house. Just because Jupiter is in Sagittarius is not necessarily a good thing. One of the most perplexing charts in terms of natal astrology is the chart of Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS. He had Jupiter in Sagittarius exactly on the midheaven. Maybe that just indicates that a mediocre person was able to reach the top of an organization like the SS, one of the most important people in Nazi Germany. Maybe Jupiter just gave him the luck. But in the case of Myanmar, there isn't much luck. And one thing that is going on in Myanmar's chart is Jupiter. Jupiter is square the midheaven. You can see Jupiter square the midheaven. And the Mars-Uranus midpoint is approximately 0 degrees 46. I think it's around 0 degrees. It's around 0 degrees Leo, and so the Mars-Uranus midpoint is square the midheaven, and also Jupiter is so Jupiter and the midheaven are both on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and so that doesn't help things. And Mars-Uranus is quite a violent pairing, and that just says something about Myanmar's history: civil war, repression, destruction, military law. It is a bit of a disaster. And then there is a question about what the earthquake did to Myanmar, what transits were going on to Myanmar's chart. And Jupiter, at the time of the earthquake, was at 15 degrees 25 Gemini. So Myanmar had Jupiter exactly opposition its natal Jupiter at the time of the earthquake. So that means that Jupiter was squaring Myanmar's midheaven. It was also it was also aspecting Myanmar's Mars-Uranus midpoint. And so this might have been a time where just something had to give, something really had to be released, and in this case, it took the form of an earthquake, and we don't know what the social and political implications of this earthquake are. But given you've got that Jupiter opposition Jupiter, we've got something which is hard coded into Myanmar's chart being released. So I do think that Myanmar's chart is interesting, and it is a warning about trying too hard to get the right time for something. Independence is a really important event, and you need to get it right. And 4:20 a.m., well, you have to judge it by actually what happened. And one wonders what the priorities were of those choosing Myanmar's independence. And I'm thinking if they were using a sidereal system, going back to the chart, if you used a sidereal system, you would have had Jupiter probably in Scorpio rising, and you would have had Mars in Leo in the 10th house. And maybe someone thought Mars in Leo in the 10th house was a good thing. It might have sounded strong. Remember, Mars goes backwards because you have to take off 24 degrees. It is in Virgo in the Western system, but it's in Leo in the Eastern system. So perhaps that was the logic, and it just really didn't work out. So you do have to be very careful about making elections, because you can create a strong chart, but sometimes things can be too strong. So having looked at Myanmar, I want to finish with the I Ching for the week. And, I have to remind you that this I Ching is optional. If you don't want your I Ching read, you don't have to have it read, and you can stop watching the video. This only applies to people who are watching the I Ching section of this video. And also remember that this I Ching section is divided up into 4 sections, four subsections: a general reading, then money, then business and career, then relationships. So I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, March the 31st, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 38, which is opposition. And this says something about how we go into the week, how we're feeling. And opposition does mean that we feel at odds with everything. We feel at odds with society, at odds with a lot of the people around us. We don't feel that we're getting a huge amount of support. And there may be a sense that we are alone, and if we try to engage with other people, we just get opposition, and we may feel that if anyone is trying to control our lives, they're an authority figure, we just want to get away from them, because we believe that certain people have an unhelpful influence on us, and we do want to get away from authority because we're not convinced that the leaders around us know what they're doing. And so it may even feel that it's just us against the rest of the world. Now, we do have 2 moving lines. Now, the 2 moving lines are not actually that bad. We have the second line moving and we have the third line moving. And The second line moving has an indication of return or a change of mind. So it might be about someone we can't stand, that we're absolutely trying to get away from, and we've made up our mind, but we might have an encounter with them in a different circumstance. So what the I Ching literally says is, we meet our Lord on the street. So, for example, if you have had an argument with your employer and you can't stand your employer, and you're seeing your employer in a particular way, I don't know, in his or her office, and then you're out shopping and you meet him or her in a completely different setting, and in a completely different setting, you see people in a different way. And that may be the social advice here. And we always have to look at context. So if there's someone you can't stand, or you believe they are oppressive, then it's all about the context. And if you can see them in a different context, you may actually realize that they're actually not so bad, and your desire to get away from them or to break off contact might not be so pressing. And then the third line moves, and the third line moving, well, it's not a good situation. It's indicating that something starts badly but has a fortunate outcome. And one reason for this might be that you can see other people being punished or suffering, and that means that you can somehow avoid the situation. This hexagram does talk about mutilation. This seems to have been a traditional Chinese punishment, cutting people's noses off and ears off. It particularly talks about people cutting noses off. So that's not very nice, and yet it has a fortunate outcome. And one interpretation of this, you observe other people having their noses cut off. In other words, other people getting humiliated, because that was the whole idea of cutting someone's nose off, was to disfigure and humiliate them. And you observe bad things happening to other people, and you're able to look after yourself, and you're able to do the right thing. And fear might have something to do with it. Fear could be very useful. We see something and it really shocks us, and we realize what could happen if we were to do something we were planning on doing. We look at the consequences. We maybe look at other people getting their noses cut off, and we don't do it ourselves. And so it might be about planning something. We were ready to do it, and then we'd realize that actually it's not such a good thing to do. But still, the I Ching does say with this third line moving that in the end it is a good outcome. And then this hexagram, it moves, and it moves to hexagram number 30, which is clinging. And the clinging is about being loyal to something. And perhaps that's a whole problem. We were looking for something to believe in, someone to trust, and we felt that sense of belonging, sense of oneness just wasn't there. And maybe we were making too much of a fuss about it. And we realized that we had what we were looking for all along. And this hexagram talks about looking after the cow. And the cow represents docility. Maybe may represent our docility. We don't have to be looking for fights and arguments, and there may be certain people, certain organizations that we want to fight. We want to, we're trying to resist them, but in the end, we might actually realize we're just happy where we are, and that might be all there is to be said. And then there is the question of money. So from a financial perspective, the week may not start particularly well. We may have concerns about money. We may feel that money is being denied to us, that we can't fully articulate our financial needs, and there are things we want, and there are things we want to do independently. And with opposition, we may be of the view that certain things that we're involved in are not doing us any good financially, and there may be a feeling then that we want to kind of escape from a situation because we feel estranged and it's not working out for us. And so there is a temptation to do something dramatic, though the second and third lines are moving. And so with the second line moving, we might have had some very negative thoughts about a financial arrangement in which we're involved with. We don't have clear evidence that it's bad, that it's not working in our favour, but we're still pretty uncomfortable with it, and it doesn't seem to be working. And maybe that's something to do with investments. Of course, the stock market has been really falling away. It's not a collapse, but it's not happy. The markets were down on Friday at the end of the week. So as we're moving into the week with a certain amount of trepidation, and so it might be that you've got your money tied up in something and you're not comfortable about it. You're thinking maybe you made a mistake or you've missed an opportunity. And I'm absolutely not giving financial advice here. I must make it clear that this video is for entertainment purposes only. But with that second line moving, we might look at our financial position or some aspect of our financial of our financial worlds, of our financial activities, something we're involved in. We may look at it in a different way. We might then realize that it's not quite as bad as it looks, and it may actually be okay. And then the third line moves, there is a feeling of financial risk there, and it could be about contemplating a financial action, but the risk there is getting our financial nose cut off. That's the embarrassment, losing money, losing our nose, being disfigured, having to put up with the humiliation of making that loss. And so it could be noticing or watching other people in financial distress. It may not be people we know. It may be people we read about in the newspapers or on the internet. Newspapers, internet, they're quite keen on having stories about people who fell for some scam or invested in the wrong thing. And by looking at another person's financial misfortune, we may be able to save ourselves a whole load of grief. And we then move to a different hexagram. We move to hexagram 30, which is the clinging. And that does indicate that by the end of a week, we should be a lot more comfortable with our financial situation. We may feel that things are actually working out, and if we hang on to what we have, then it should be okay. There's no need to panic. That clinging, I said the clinging is about the cow. The cow may be our investments, or just maybe the money in the bank, and we hold on to that money. And it might be about just holding. Again, I have to be really careful here because I'm not giving financial advice here, entertainment purposes only, but the clinging might say something about holding on to an investment that one really wants to sell but just being able to appreciate that investment. So if you're feeling that you really are under pressure, because of the markets, and you want to get rid of something, maybe you should hold on to that cow. But you have to look at your own financial situation. But there is an indication that you shouldn't give up on something, even though you're feeling that it's not looking good. So you don't give up on what you already have, but it might be not such a good time to be making new investments or taking new risks. But really, you have to look at your own financial situation and make a judgment and get qualified advice. You know what I mean? All the usual warnings. And now let's look at career and business. It doesn't start off too well because of this hexagram 38, which is opposition. Feeling estranged from co-workers, employers, employees. We don't feel particularly appreciated, and when we look at who we're taking orders from, if we're in that situation, if this applies, if we look at who we're taking orders from, we're thinking, do these people know what they're doing? And we really don't like authority figures, and we don't understand them, and we want to get away from them. And if you're in a job, you may start the week feeling you want to leave this job. You might want to quit. And if you have that feeling, which is quite understandable, you need to be patient. Things might not be quite as bad as they seem. And with this second hexagram moving, you just may have an opportunity to see an authority figure, a manager, your boss, in a different way. Or it could be that you get to see your employees in a different way. You see them in a different context. And that is the problem of, if you are working, seeing someone in their role, you don't see them as a person, as a real person. You only see them as a real person when you see them out in the street, or when you see them when you're out shopping, or in a totally different environment. Then you start to see them as a real human being. And when you actually start to see people as real human beings, you then start to appreciate them more. And maybe that's what you need to do if you are working, if business is important. Look at all the people you're dealing with, and you might get a different view. Now, you do have to be careful, because with the third line moving, you probably don't want to do anything dramatic. Because if you were to do something dramatic, things might go wrong. And it might be better if you stayed where you were. Remember, that third line is about getting your nose cut off. It is about mutilation and embarrassment. And when you see what goes wrong with other people who do what you were contemplating, you might have second thoughts. And there may actually be a sense of fear here. And fear could be useful. You can see what would happen at work if you were to take some kind of initiative. If you were to I don't know, if you have your own business, you might start to plan something, and you might be about to do it, then you hold back, and you should be holding back, and you get a warning, you listen to the warning, and you're okay. And with those two moving lines, this moves, and it moves to hexagram number 30, which is the clinging. And I think the broad message in terms of career and business with hexagram 30 is to be happy with what you've got, to nurture what you've got, the clinging. You nurture the cow, it's your position, it's what you have. So build on your job or your business as it is. It's not a time for expansion. It's not a time for taking on anything new. But if you make the most of what you have, because you've listened to the warnings, you're not trying to do something differently, then in the end, things should be okay. And finally, there is relationships. Relationships of all kinds. Well, I don't think that relationships start off particularly well this week, because we've got 38. I mean, 38 opposition, you could say, is about relationships. Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, he calls opposition, he describes it as estrangement. And that just may be that we are estranged from certain people in our lives. Maybe people who are very close to us, partners, spouses, other people who are important. And we just feel that we're on a different wavelength, that we just have a different priority, and they don't understand us, we don't understand them, and things aren't moving. And that might be how you feel at the beginning of this week. And we do have two moving lines. And a second moving line is about an accidental meeting. And it's about meeting. It does indicate, though, that it's an accidental meeting with someone we already know. But be on the lookout for a meeting that just is unexpected. Maybe you meet someone you know. Maybe you see you could see an existing partner or someone else you're close to in a different context. But it creates a change, and it may, of course, if you're looking for a new relationship, that second line moving may indicate a chance encounter, and a chance encounter which really works in your favor. And then third line moving is not so fortunate. It might indicate that you're planning on doing something or announcing something in a relationship, and you might feel that's a good idea, but it might actually not be a bad idea, not be a good idea at all. Or it might be about a temptation to embark on a new relationship, or to get closer to someone, or to make some kind of move. But if you do that, you could be humiliated. Remember, that third line from the bottom is about getting your nose cut off, and you kind of have a choice there. I'm not saying your nose is literally going to get cut off, but the wrong relationship could be humiliating. And I'm not necessarily talking about romance. It could be any kind of relationship. So you need to pause, and you need to think about what could go wrong, and you will get a warning, and you might be frightened off. And sometimes it's good to be frightened off, because you know what could happen if maybe you were just a little too forward, a little bit too ambitious in terms of working or dealing with another person. And then we have two moving lines, so we move to a different hexagram, and we move to hexagram 30, which is the clinging. And as far as relationships are concerned, the message is cling on to the person you have. So be grateful for some of your existing relationships, the relationship you're in, the relationship that is most important to you, or just maybe the pattern of relationships. You cling on to it, hold on to it, and it is going to be okay. So it's about counting your blessings. Not everyone is perfect with the clinging, but you can be appreciated, you will be appreciated, but it's probably not a week for making huge changes. You're tempted to make huge changes, though sometimes we do have to take the I Ching literally. That second line of the previous hexagram, the opposition, can be about a chance meeting, and that chance meeting could be very important as far as certain relationships are concerned. Indeed, it might be a new relationship, but I think in most cases, just just stay where you are, stay with the people who are already around you, and really try to make the most of them. And it's possible that there is someone you've underestimated. You've taken the view that they're not helpful, you're sick of them, you've had enough of them, you want to leave, that you want them to leave, but you have another look at them and you realize maybe they're not so bad after all. And that's it. That's I Ching. And I hope you have a great week. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.